Okay, let's dive straight into this absolutely historic constitutional process unfolding right now in the Philippines. We're literally witnessing a super rare event on the global stage. The House of Representatives has actually impeached Vice President Sara Duterte. And this isn't just your standard political headline, right? It's a massive constitutional stress test. For those of us tracking the machinery of government, we know impeachment is one of the most drastic levers a democracy can pull. So in this explainer, we're going to look strictly at the mechanics. What exactly happens when the vice president is impeached? And maybe the biggest question on everyone's mind, how does this process dictate whether she can still run for president in those highly anticipated 2028 elections? Here's how we're going to map this out today. 1. The historic impeachment itself. 2. The grounds for removal. 3. The impeachment process. 4. The ultimate verdict. 5. The 2028 election question. And finally, number 6, filling the vacancy. All right, let's get into it. So, part 1, a historic impeachment, the news hook. Just look at the sheer arithmetic of this situation. 257 out of 290 lawmakers in attendance at the House of Representatives voted to impeach the vice president. To put that into perspective, the Constitution only requires a 1/3 vote to advance the case to a trial. So 257, that is a massive, decisive majority. It really signals a severe fracturing of that huge electoral alliance that originally brought the president and vice president into office together back in 2022. The political stakes here seriously couldn't be higher. Take a look at this BBC News report. It points out that this vote is directly threatening her plan to run for president in 2028. And remember, she's holding a significant lead over her nearest rivals in the early surveys for that exact race. Now, the case against her stems from allegations of misused public funds and some controversial public statements. But the underlying current of this entire ordeal, it's absolutely that 2028 presidential campaign. Now, to understand exactly how this all works, we're relying strictly on the 1987 Constitution and this highly authoritative primer from the UP College of Law. We're not here to take sides, folks. We are just here to unpack the law. Because while the headlines are totally focused on the personalities involved, the actual outcome is going to be completely governed by the strict rules laid out in these constitutional documents. So, the absolutely crucial point here is that impeachment, it's not your standard criminal trial. It is a unique political safeguard designed to determine if a public officer is fit to stay in office. The UP College of Law primer specifically uses this Latin term sui generis. It basically means it's in a class of its own. The facts and the law aren't being weighed by impartial judges in a regular courtroom. Instead, they're weighed by popularly elected members of Congress. A conviction here doesn't send someone to prison, it removes them from power. Moving on to part 2. Grounds for removal. What exactly justifies impeachment? Well, you can't impeach a vice president just because you disagree with their policies, right? Under Article 11, Section 2 of the Constitution, an official can only be impeached for these 6 specific, super serious offenses. In Vice President Duterte's case, the allegations, which, include the alleged misuse of public funds, are being funneled through these strict constitutional categories. Mostly, we're looking at graft and corruption and betrayal of public trust. That last one, betrayal of public trust, is particularly fascinating. It kind of acts as a catch-all provision. The framers of the Constitution intended it to cover actions that severely damage the integrity of public office, even if they aren't explicitly criminal. Which brings us to part 3, the impeachment process, a 2-stage journey. You see, impeachment is purposely designed to be a grueling marathon, definitely not a sprint. There's a very strict division of labor here. The House has the exclusive power to initiate the case, acting as the prosecutors, while the Senate has the sole power to try and decide the case, acting as the judges. So the House conducts the hearings, they debate the evidence, and ultimately draft what are called the Articles of Impeachment. Once those get approved, the House essentially becomes the prosecution team. They literally walk the case over to the Senate, which then transforms itself into an impeachment court. Notice the massive mathematical hurdle we're looking at. It only takes 1/3 of the House to initiate the impeachment. But it takes a really difficult 2/3 majority in the Senate to actually convict. As we saw earlier, the House easily cleared that 1/3 threshold with those 257 votes. But the Senate, that is a completely different battlefield. There are only 24 senators. So to hit that 2/3 majority, 16 of them have to vote guilty on at least one article of impeachment. And here's the kicker. While House members are elected locally and often aligned with the sitting president, senators are elected nationally. They have their own nationwide mandates, their own political ambitions. That makes their votes highly, highly unpredictable. All right, part 4, the ultimate verdict, impeached versus convicted. We definitely need to clear up a huge public misconception right now. When you hear the vice president was impeached, she is not fired yet. Being impeached by the House is really just the equivalent of being formally charged or indicted. The Constitution actually doesn't provide for any preventive suspension during this period, so she remains the vice president of the Philippines, fully empowered, holding and exercising all the functions of her office, while the 24 senators conduct her trial.
Now for Part 5, the 2028 election question, the climax.
Okay, let's dive into the absolute core of the political drama happening right now. If she's currently leading the early surveys for the presidency, how exactly does the Senate trial dictate her future? The vice president announced her intention to run for president way earlier than expected, so the entire 2028 electoral landscape literally hinges on what happens inside that Senate chamber. And the answer really comes down to a binary outcome: acquittal or conviction. Let's look at the first scenario. If the Senate fails to reach that two-thirds guilty vote, meaning they get 15 votes or fewer, she is acquitted. And her 2028 presidential campaign, it can proceed completely unimpeded. An acquittal simply means she finishes out her term as vice president, her political rights remain fully intact, and she takes that frontrunner status straight into the 2028 general election. However, the text of Article 11, Section 3 is absolute. If she is convicted, she's not just immediately removed from office. She is permanently banned from ever running for president or literally any public office ever again. A conviction means removal and perpetual disqualification. She couldn't run for president, senator, mayor, or even a local barangay position. If 16 senators vote guilty, her political career under the Philippine Republic effectively ends that very day. Finally, Part 6, filling the vacancy. What happens next? Well, the Constitution abhors a vacuum, especially at the executive level. So what happens to the country if the vice president is actually convicted and removed? Article 7 mandates this really specific two-step process to ensure the position doesn't stay vacant, and it shifts the power back to the president and Congress to find a replacement. It's a pretty fascinating mechanism, actually. The public doesn't vote in a special election for a new VP. Instead, the sitting president chooses a nominee. But that nominee has to come from the current members of the Senate or the House of Representatives. Then, a simple majority vote of both houses, voting separately, is required to confirm them. So, as this trial unfolds, I'll leave you with this final thought. The law provides the structure, sure, but the final verdict rests entirely in the hands of a highly unpredictable political arena. The Constitution gives us the rules of the game, the grounds, the two-thirds threshold, the permanent disqualification. But it's those 24 senators, each with their own national constituencies, navigating a multi-party system of shifting dynastic alliances, who will actually make the choice. Will they acquit and pave the way for a 2028 presidential run? Or will they convict, altering the course of Philippine history forever? Keep your eyes on the Senate, folks, because that is exactly where the future will be decided.